Welcome to another episode of Becoming a Mental Health Champion, the podcast. I'm your host, Reggie Burton, founder of the Avery Burton Foundation and author of the new book, Becoming a Mental Health Champion. The podcast is presented by the ABF Resiliency Project. Our goals are to use the power of storytelling to have discussions about mental wellness through the lens of sports, business, and leadership. Please subscribe to the ABFRP YouTube channel, like and comment your suggestions on current or past episodes. So, in the last episode of the podcast, which happened to be the first one, I shared the origin story of me becoming a mental health advocate. And for those of you that don't know, I am a suicide loss survivor. My son Avery had a major depressive episode in 2017 after graduating from college. And that led me on this journey that includes two books. I wrote a book called This is Depression about 5 years ago, and that was kind of my warning to families and loved ones, people going through mental health challenges, about the dangers of depression. More recently, I wrote a second book, which is called Becoming a Mental Health Champion, available on Amazon and soon Barnes and Noble. And in that book, I go into more detail about my journey, the different challenges with grief and the different stages and all those things, um, so that people could better understand uh, how I arrived at this place of becoming a champion for mental health. So my background is I'm a communication strategist. I've worked in the NFL and I've worked with professional athletes and sports teams. But in general, I'm just a really big sports fan. So you might have been one of the millions of people around the world really tuning into the World Series, where my LA Dodgers are going against the Toronto Blue Jays. Apparently, ratings have been really, really good, especially in the US and Canada, despite all the turmoil that's happening in the world, um, geopolitics and those things. And also in Japan, because the Dodgers obviously have some very popular players on their roster that have also had success in Japan. So you may have heard about Game 3 the other night in LA, which went 18 innings, lasted over 6.5 hours, second longest game in World Series history. If I got some of my stats wrong on that, please feel free to correct me in the comment section. So, in today's episode, I really wanted to discuss what athletes teach us about mental toughness. So, I want to draw a few lessons from the locker room. In my book, again titled Becoming a Mental Health Champion, I um, talk about this in a chapter called Locker Room Talk. Champions keep playing until they get it right. And if you think about the headlines coming out of the 18 inning World Series game the other night, and by the way, where were you when this game was being played? I actually watched the game in a sports book. I thought I was just going to sit down for a little bit, soak up some of the ambiance of watching the World Series, kind of a thing to do where I live in Henderson, Nevada, and not far from the Las Vegas Strip. But in any event, feel free to comment where you watched the game, or did you watch all of it? Did you fall asleep? I'd just be kind of curious to know. But one of the headlines coming out of the game was about Freddie Freeman and his walk-off home run. And if you follow baseball, Freddie Freeman had a walk-off home run for the Dodgers last year against the New York Yankees in Game 1. And I was actually in Florida visiting one of my boys, my son, who lives in Jacksonville and works for the Jacksonville Jaguars. We'll probably maybe have him come on the podcast and talk about his experiences in the NFL. But in any event, I was in a bar in Jacksonville surrounded by many Yankee fans, and that was a very interesting experience. But that Freeman home run the other night um, basically ended what amounted to be 2 games in one, or a doubleheader. Um, I don't think the players thought they're going to play a doubleheader, but the fans definitely got their money's worth. But back to the players. So both teams coming out of that game had to figure out a way to recover, both physically from playing a doubleheader that they didn't plan to play, but also um, recover mentally, because that was a long game with lots of twists and turns, ups and downs, because that is the nature of sports. Um, so, Dodger players probably slept a lot better, right? Because they're at home, the game's in LA, and probably just more of a comfortable environment for them. For the Blue Jays, though, you go back and you probably fret a little bit more, have a little harder time going back to sleep at the hotel. Um, but essentially, getting into game 4, um, which is actually the next day or a few hours later because of the length of the game, both teams essentially were in the same boat. They had to figure out a way, how do we recover? So in game 4, the Blue Jays came out on top. They, at least to me, clearly seemed like the team that was the more focused and determined. Um, they won the game to tie the series. So the headline coming out of that game was about Toronto's resilience. So we went from the euphoria of Freddie Freeman's walk-off home run in game 3 to the storyline being about Toronto's resilience. What was the difference? Well, the main difference is athletes know that it's essential for them to bounce back quickly from defeat, to move on to the next play, the next at bat, or the next game. They call this flushing. So if you watch press conferences, if you paid any attention on social media, you probably heard the players refer to this process called flushing. And that literally just basically means taking that disappointment and flushing it down the toilet. That way you clear your mind and clear your headspace to be able to focus on the next opportunity, which was literally within hours. Um, that is resilience in action. So in my book, Becoming a Mental Health Champion, I talk quite a bit about this process and what athletes and what business leaders have to go through to recover from setbacks. Is actually chapter 9 in my book, called Locker Room Talk: Champions Keep Playing Until They Get It Right. I refer to some of my experiences working in professional sports, and I think back and I write about in 2023 what happened with the Vegas Golden Knights. They're one of my clients, and they just had an incredible season that led them to the Stanley Cup playoffs, all the way up to um, the finals. And along the way, it what stuck out in my mind was that it was not like this clear path, right? Nothing's ever clear. You have to overcome obstacles and hurdles, and not only as a team, but also, the players. So as a result of that, one of the coaches, actually the head coach of the Vegas Golden Knights, Bruce Cassidy, came up with this sort of phrase, and a theme emerged in that series against the Florida Panthers, and that's winning hurts. And that message became BGK's mantra. And it was simple and it was raw. It was basically saying, despite the physical and emotional toll that the team had to deal with, they could still achieve the ultimate goal, becoming champions, if they embrace the grind. And that's what, all athletes, whether it's baseball players or, you know, NHL teams, they have to do that. And one of the players that stuck out to me from that team was a guy named Robin Leonard. He actually was a goaltender. He's a former Golden Knight player now, but He actually had been very open throughout his career and throughout that season about his struggles with being bipolar, um, and talked on his social media quite often about what it took for him to be able to prepare himself to be in a space where you could lead a team um, on a Stanley Cup championship run. Now, a rash of injuries forced him to miss that championship run, but it was a reminder of that physical toll, as well as emotional toll that it takes. Um, in 2019, obviously prior to that championship run, he tweeted, and I quote, "Being open about my bipolar was a choice to help others, to help people that struggle with mental illness, to see it's possible to be accepted." So bringing it back to baseball the other night, um, the players talked about flushing and what they need to do, and all those things. And I think this is where athletes and we talk about lessons we can learn from athletes. I think this is where athletes really give us um, a look at what that flushing process can look like and how we could take something, from that. So let's talk about baseball for a moment. In baseball, even if you don't follow sports, it's going to make sense to you whether you're a business person or non-sports fan like me. But uh, baseball players, some of the top players like Shohei Ohtani, um, Vladimir Guerrero Jr., some of these players who are in the World Series now, but many others, this applies to them. To be able to hit 300 or come close to it, um, you're considered successful as a batter. And it's something that's very rare in Major League Baseball for players to be hitting above or around that 300 mark. And when you do that, you are obviously highly compensated, but you're highly regarded as a batter. And to put that into perspective, though, to bat 300 means that you failed 70% of the time. So think about your work or what you do where you have that much failure occurring or that much adversity or setbacks that you're experiencing, to be able to come back from that, to continue to perform and to continue to compete and ultimately achieve a batting average of 300, which is considered pretty good, but you're still failing 70% of the time. So I think one of the lessons I would just draw uh, our minds to when we think about what we're watching in this World Series is that these players have to come back from strikeouts, pop outs, basically getting out 70% of the time if we're talking about batting. But then that 30% of the time where they're dialed in and their timing is just right to be able to catch up to a 100-mile-per-hour fastball, um, that requires some perseverance, that requires some mental toughness, much in the same way that these players the other night, again, we go back to this World Series, and I'm recording this um, prior to Game 5, which would be played on Wednesday. So essentially, these players are having to play 4 games in 3 nights. So 2 games in Game 3, 9 innings plus another 9, almost another 9 inning, or yeah, another 9 innings um, with the extra innings. So that's like a doubleheader. And then they play, Game 4, and then we'll find out what happens in Game 5. But that's basically 4 games in 3 nights. So the amount of, you know, emotional fortitude that you have to be able to come back and, make errors or have good plays and then that place and that roller coaster ride. I just think that, um, I reflect on my book again, Becoming a Mental Health Champion, in chapter 9, Locker Room Talk, and how champions keep playing until they get it right. So we think about what that means for you in your life, and the lessons we can take away from that. So I mentioned Robin Leonard, who's a goalie, and I encourage you to um, check him out on social media if you want to know a little bit more about his story. I'm not even sure if he's in the league right now. I know he, again, had some injury issues and some struggles off the ice with his mental health and some other things personally. But there are many, many other coaches and leaders who led with vulnerability and talking about their mental health that are athletes um, who are achieving at a very high level. Jerry West, and I mentioned him, I'm a Lakers fan, having grown up in LA. He talked about his struggle with depression. I've had a lot of success, but I've also been in a lot of dark places. You never know what someone's going through. I write about that in my book. His words remind us that the pressure doesn't end when the games do. Even legends need help. So, again, how do we think about that in the context of our work, us as leaders? If you're a manager or someone that is responsible for a team at your place of employment, I think about my personal story with my son Avery and trying to help him use those same lessons. Remember when he was in high school, he's a really good athlete, three sport athlete, track and field, wrestling, tennis. Um, but the summer before his freshman year, I sat down with him and he told me that he wanted to try out for the tennis team. And I said, okay. I played tennis in high school. I wasn't great, but I played and kind of went through that process. I offered to help him. Plus, trying to hire a tennis coach that, can get pretty expensive. So I gave it a shot, tried to share some things with him. So we hit the courts, and again, I write about this in my book. But uh, one of the things I tried to do in terms of teaching him the fundamentals of tennis, that was one thing. But I also wanted to try to give him a little bit of a mental edge just based on my background in sports and having worked in the NFL and all that stuff. So I shared a book with him, and please comment if you've read it. It's called The Inner Game of Tennis by Timothy Galway. To me, he's one of the best when it comes to sports performance, and he talks a lot about the mindset of 90% of what happens is above your shoulders, um, in terms of uh, what you have to do and what you have to think about when it comes to performance. And we'll get into more of that another time. But I gave Avery the book and I asked him to read it to help him prepare his mindset. Fast forward in the story, Avery wound up becoming um, a varsity member without ever having ever played tennis before. So he made the varsity. And by his sophomore year, he actually got the most improved player. And I credit a lot of what he was able to accomplish in tennis, despite not having as much experience as some of his teammates and other players he was competing against, is the fact that one, he was a good athlete. Two, he prepared himself for being able to control situations um, in match play, both through his skill set, but also mentally, and not being able to get hung up on getting a serve, smashed by you or um, having a volley not land in, or the different things that happen in the sport of tennis. Avery went on to have a really good, very distinguished high school career. I'm probably understating that a little bit. He actually earned the white letter at Foothill High School in Henderson, which meant he earned a varsity letter in 3 different sports: tennis, of course, and then wrestling and track and field. He was a sprinter. Actually, he set the um, school record in 4x2 relay with 3 of his teammates. So he was pretty accomplished. But I share all that to say this. Um, we can learn a lot from sports. Sports is entertainment. We love to watch our favorite colleges, schools that we maybe attended, or our favorite teams from places where we grew up. But I think one of the things that we can also do is we can also learn from these athletes. We can learn um, about resilience. We can learn the art of the bounce back and coming back from failure, relative failure, um, to success. And whether it's playing 18 innings of baseball or um, making the freshman or the varsity tennis team, there's just all sorts of ways that we can learn from uh, failure as well as success so that we can help build our resilience. So that's about all for this episode of Becoming a Mental Health Champion podcast. I'm going to try to share as much as I can about lessons from my book, and I will also look at lessons that we can learn from people, average, regular people that work a job or business leaders. If you have thoughts about someone that is a mental health champion, and in future episodes, I will talk more about what it takes to become a mental health champion based on my experience in mental wellness and advocacy. But if you have suggestions for someone you'd like um, or a topic you'd like me to address, I will try to invite special guests. We'll, maybe have panel discussions where we have more than one person join me to have more discussions. Please comment that in the comment section of this video. So again, thank you for joining us and on Becoming a Mental Health Champion podcast. I hope that you subscribe and add your voice to the conversation. And until the next episode, I'd like to share with you a phrase that Avery had uh, uh, shared with us, and it's, I don't have weekdays in my calendar, I only have strong days. So I wish all of you strong days and no weekdays, and becoming a mental health champion. Until the next time, take care.